I don't know, man. Looks like a pretty good crowd on a Saturday night to me. As my mother would say, God love you all for being here. And especially anybody under the age of 10. We owe you big, man. Folks, I want to start off by thanking Bonnie Campbell. You know, it's true I did write the Violence Against Women Act, one of the proudest things I've ever done in my career. But it was hard getting it off the ground. And President Clinton then asked me how I'd like to move forward with it, which is an unusual thing when someone in the Congress writes and writes the law. The administration usually implements the law. But he turned to me and said, how should we implement this law? And he said, who do you want to run the show? And I really mean this. I said, I want the Attorney General of the state of Iowa to run the show. Bonnie Campbell is the reason why it got off the ground. Bonnie Campbell is the reason why it worked. Bonnie Campbell did more not only nationally but internationally to deal with efforts to change the culture. This is all about changing our culture and how we treat women in America and we treat women around the world. And Bonnie, I really mean it. We talked about it in the bus. You're too modest. None of this would have really been able to get off the ground without you. So thank you, Bonnie Campbell. I really mean that. As I traveled around the world as Vice President, as Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, literally every capital I'd go to, I meet with women, whether it was in India or Pakistan or all across the world, and say, how did you get that done? How can we do that in our countries? You know, there's a famous Chinese expression that says, women hold up half the sky. They hold up half the sky. Well, there's a new sort of economic rule, like a rule of physics. No country can be competitive in the 21st century without fully integrating women in everything. It's not possible. Oh, so that's a fact. By the way, that's not hyperbole. That is a fact. That is just a natural fact. And I also want to, I tell you what, having the Congresswoman from the 1st District go out of her way like she has for me has made a great deal of difference to me. It's one of the most coveted endorsements anybody look for. Hey, man, how you doing, Bob? Good to see you guys. I tell you what, two great friends. Anyway, it's one of the most coveted endorsements anyone could have in the state. And she's been a great, great help to me and given me a lot of insight about not just the 1st District, but Iowa as well, even though I thought I understood it pretty well. Folks, look, and she's right. You've got to send Cindy back to the United States Congress in the system. You know, we all have a similar background. We're only 1 or 2 years apart, you know, in age, but the truth is I'm the first in the Biden family to get a college degree to go, and I was the oldest in the family, and we used to have the same, I think our grandfathers must have been related, because after 10:30 Mass in St. Paul's and Scranton, everybody come back to my grandpa's house and sit around the kitchen table and argue politics and sports. But my grandpa was the one who convinced me and taught me, and I learned at his table, that every single solitary person in the country, every person we knew, no one was better than me, but I was no better than anybody else. And the line that I've learned from my dad, I'm not joking about this, my dad, and I've written extensively about it. He said, everybody, the word most often used adjective was dignity. Everyone is entitled to be treated with dignity, no matter where they come from, no matter what their background, what their race, religion, or ethnicity is. And folks, it's what I was about as I travel. I've been to all 99 counties over my career here, campaigning, going back to campaigning for John Culver and others in this state over the years. And Iowa is about basic fundamental values. It sounds corny, but it's true. Think about it. You know, we talk about how we, in America, the rest of the world, I've traveled in most countries in the world, met virtually every major world leader in the last 40 years. And they somehow think we're kind of naive because we talk about fairness, we talk about decency, we talk about honesty. What is it that we're missing these days? We don't spend a lot of time thanking one another. We have a president who goes out of his way to try to divide us based on our race, based on our religion, based on where we come from. You know, it just, to me, is something that is extremely, extremely worrisome. And we found ourselves, because I'm looking forward to having questions, I'm going to be particularly brief here, but I ran for 3 reasons when I announced for the United States presidency for the nomination. I said the first reason was to restore the soul of the nation. You know, when I saw those, I came out of the civil rights movement as a kid in my state of Delaware because they're the 8th largest African-American population in the country. And it was segregated when I moved from Scranton when there was no work and my dad had to move to Delaware to find a job. And, it's amazing. I never thought I'd see the day again when we found ourselves with people coming out of the fields carrying torches in Charlottesville, a historic city in the South. Close your eyes and picture what you saw on television. Their veins literally bulging, screaming and shouting hate and vile things, carrying Nazi flags, and making sure that they talked about white supremacy, accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. David Duke, former head of the Klan, said, "This is why we elected him." A young woman gets killed in the melee, and the president is asked, "What do you think of that?" And his response was a response no president has ever given. He said there were very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides. No one, with the possible exception of Andrew Jackson before the Civil War, ever said anything remotely like that. And everything has been about dividing us, not uniting us. And so I wrote an article back then for the Atlantic magazine saying we have to restore the soul of America. And that includes further living up to the necessity of finally and fully expanding the promise of America to black and brown Americans, which we've yet to do. Folks, there's so much we have to correct, but we can. I said the second reason I was running was to rebuild the middle class, because it's getting clobbered. I know the stock market's sky high. I get that. But I know the tax cut has helped very few people and has helped them a great deal. But what's happened? The middle class is getting clobbered. They're getting clobbered. The majority of the people in the middle class today think their children will never have the same standard of living they have. First time in American history, we're no longer, now in the last 100 years, we're no longer the wealthiest middle class in the world. We now are in a position where the studies show if a middle class family received an unexpected bill for $400 in 1 month, they'd have to borrow the money or sell something to be able to make it. There's not a whole lot of breathing room. Not a whole lot of breathing room. We have to rebuild it. This time bring everybody along. Not leave anybody behind. Whether you're handicapped, whether you have a problem, whatever your issue is, everybody's got to have a chance. Look, Wall Street didn't build America. The middle class built America. And unions built the middle class. Unions built the middle class. And as was mentioned by the Congresswoman, the third reason I ran is that we have to unite this country. Look, that's what I'll do as your presidential nominee if I'm your nominee. Unite the country, because guess what? We can't do it any other way. The way our whole system is built, it's built on requiring a consensus to be reached. We can't do it without abusing power, without generating a consensus. And we can do that if we stop questioning people's motives and start to argue with them about the substance of our disagreement. If I turn around and say, you're in the pocket of, or you're unethical, or you're this, and say, by the way, let's figure out how to build more roads and airports and transportation and deal with global warming, fat chance. But if I disagree with you on the substance of what you say, we argue like the devil, we can then reach an agreement based on what we disagree on, as long as you don't go after each other in a mean way. I promise you, we can do it. I've done it my whole career. That's what I've done, being able to put things together. And we have to be able to do that. For our own safety's sake, for the sake of our children, it's got to be able to be done. And folks, I'd be remiss if I didn't speak just a few minutes before I go to questions about Iran. You know, first, as we go forward, let me make it clear. President Trump has no authority to take us to a military conflict with Iran, period. He has no inherent authority. Taking a nation to war requires the informed consent of the American people through their Congress. Otherwise, it's an abuse of promise. The bottom line is, any further action against Iran requires congressional authorization. And I support the efforts by Congress to insist and assert their constitutional prerogative. Congressional leaders have to send a very clear message to the President. He does not have the authority to take us to war, another war in the Middle East, and they'll oppose him if he attempts to do so. The second point I'll make is, let's not forget how we got here. What he set in motion was set in motion and predictable. And I'm not the only one, but I predicted it 6 months ago, that this president would in fact, when he canceled the nuclear deal, which I and others in my administration helped put together, that was being enforced. Remember what he said? He said, what we're going to do is we're going to walk away from that commitment. We're going to act as America first. What did it do? It put us last. It split up our allies. We, in fact, now have in the Persian Gulf Russian, Chinese, and Iranian ships patrolling the Gulf. We find ourselves in a position our allies have worked against us. They no longer prepared to support us because we have walked away, and Iran has begun the process of trying to get a nuclear weapon, which there was no possibility of them getting without us knowing well 2 years in advance of them doing it. The most intrusive regime ever set forward in an inspection existed. It was predictable what would happen. Making America first, in his view, put America alone. And so, folks, it's not a surprise that this cycle of violence began. And third, Soleimani, who headed up the Quds Force, their special forces in Iran, he does have American blood on his hands. So don't mourn his passing. But the administration has given us no confidence they have any plan or strategy in place for what to do next. None. This president said he's made us safer, yet they're ordering evacuation of American citizens from Iraq and around the entire region. He said he did this to stop a war. It's moved us precipitously close to an all-out war. We're sending 1,000 more troops, combat troops, into the area. And if, God forbid, war breaks out, we'll send well over 100,000 troops. And we're not talking about a nation with 6 million people, 40 million people. You're a veteran of Vietnam, and I want to thank you for your service, but the last thing we need is another war in the Middle East. And folks, my greatest worry is, does anyone have confidence that Donald Trump has thought through what the next steps are? No, I mean, think about it. I know it almost sounds, I spent my whole life doing national security and foreign policy. As chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and the reason why President Obama picked me was because of my background in national security and foreign policy and intelligence matters. You don't do things this way. There's no evidence. Think what's happening. Our very NATO allies are chastening both us and Iran at the same time, saying neither one of you should do anything. They're allies. No one's saying if America is attacked now, we're going to go to his defense. What's going on here? Has he thought through the second and third layers of what happens? No one should engage in this kind of activity unless they've thought through what the next steps are. And though it may exist, but so far it's an absolute secret to the vast majority of people. And finally, all this just reinforces the stakes of this election, in my view. That's why it's so important to elect someone who's already ready on day one when they're elected. To pick up the pieces. To pick up the pieces of this disarray and immediately be a commander-in-chief of our armed forces and get to work repairing our relationships around the world because our alliances are in jeopardy and therefore our security is in jeopardy. We need to provide a steady, stable, experienced leadership. And with all due respect, I think I'm best prepared to do than anybody running for president right now. And let me conclude and then go to questions with one last thing. With all the difficulties we face, when I got elected as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate, I wasn't even old enough to be sworn in. I had to wait 17 days to be eligible. That's a fact, constitutionally. And I was characterized as a young, idealistic, optimistic young guy. I give you my word as a Biden, I'm more optimistic about America's chances to lead the world today than I have ever been in my entire career. We have the greatest research universities in the world. We have more great research universities here than all the rest of the world combined. And every major change that will affect this beautiful young woman's life comes out of those research universities. It doesn't come from businesses. It's monetized by businesses. But it comes from the incredible intellectual capital we have. We lead the world by a long shot. We're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. And if we invest in our people, we can maintain our standing in the world and provide an opportunity for people to succeed and us to be a benefit to the rest of the world at the same time. Amen. We have the most productive workers in the world. Workers in the United States are 3 times as productive as workers in Asia. Fact. And we find ourselves in a position where we are better positioned than any other nation in the world compared to any other country. There used to be an expression in the neighborhood we moved out of Scranton to a little steel town called Claymont, Delaware. I won't use the exact expression, but we used to say something to the effect, the rest of the world's not a patch on our genes. Guess what? Not because they're bad, but we are so much better positioned. China doesn't have enough water to make sure its people have enough to drink. Not a joke. They're talking about multi-billion-dollar projects to turn around rivers to be able to provide water for their people. I'm not happy about that, but they have problems. They have 1 million Uyghurs who are in concentration camps in the West, Muslims. You see what's happening in Hong Kong. It's between 30 and 40% of their land is polluted with cadmium. Their arable land, they can't produce enough. They're divided east and west. That's not a good thing. But the idea that China is going to overtake the United States of America, if we invest in our people, we can help move the world in the right direction without sending thousands of troops. Folks, we're the most powerful military in the history of the world. That's not hyperbole, it's a fact. But that's not the reason why we lead the world. We lead the world because not the example of our power, but the power of our example. That's why the rest of the world follows us. And folks, let me conclude by saying, this is the United States of America. There's never been a time, never, and it's not hyperbole, when we've set our mind to something, we've been unable to accomplish it. So it's time we get up, take back this country, and take back the world in a way that we can lead it once again. This is the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity. Don't forget it. That's who we are. Thank you for listening, and why don't I take questions? And if you ask me, I try to answer as many questions as I can. If it's an essay question, then it's going to take longer. So try to, if you get, you'd rather be where? You'd rather eat pizza. I'll tell you what.
Hi, my name is Gianna Darville. I'm an ambassador with the Truth Initiative and a college student in Huntsville, Alabama. My question has to do with the vaping epidemic. My question is, if elected, what do you think we as a country should do to address the over 25% of young people that were vaping as of 2019?
A couple things. Number one, you ever heard about the vaping? First of all, it's overwhelmingly clear that vaping has had a profound negative impact on young people, number one. But number two, what we haven't done as a country is we haven't set an example of what we should be doing, not only related to vaping, but everything from opioids to other things that are happening out there. I think if I were President of the United States, I would put a halt to the ability for that to occur and make sure that we, in fact, begin to enforce the law and have the science decide. Science decide what, in fact, makes sense. Folks, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. We got to let them know who we are. We choose science over fiction, and it works us to take a look at it. So I would strongly urge for the CDC to go out and make sure that it halts until we have serious scientific data as to whether or not it has the kind of long-term damage on their lungs and even causes death before we allow it to be sold legally. Thank you. Anybody have a mic back there? Anybody on this side? Go ahead and yell in.
All right. My question is about foreign policy. And
yes.
I'm with you 90% of the way, so I'm hoping you can push me over the top right now. In the 1980s, you were for the nuclear freeze. In the 1990s, you were against the first Gulf War. But in 2000, you were for the second Gulf War, which was a mess. And then in 2011, you told congressional Democrats that you advised President Obama to not go forward with the bin Laden raid. So my question is, with foreign policy, clearly the world's in flames right now. How can we trust your judgment on those key issues you missed?
All right. The answer is I will put my total record against anybody in public life. I'm also the guy that confronted Slobodan Milosevic and brought him down. I'm also the guy that put together the effort to not send significant troops to Afghanistan. I'm also the guy that put together the effort to bring together NATO to hold the Russians accountable for the invasion of Ukraine. But here's the deal. The issue relating to, one, the war in Iraq. What happened was, remember, the president was arguing that, in fact, there were nuclear weapons and chemical weapons being made by Saddam Hussein, and that he wanted to be able to get inspectors into Iraq to determine whether or not that was true. And the only way that could be done is get the Security Council to agree to vote to give him authority to go in and bring in inspectors. Because my concern was if he didn't do that, he would just go to war, which I strongly opposed. He looked me in the eye in the Oval Office and promised me all he was doing was wanting to get the authority to be able to send in inspectors. The fact is that he sent the inspectors in, and you may recall, because you seem to be well informed, go back and look at the record, how I disagreed with the assertion that Saddam was in fact engaged in chemical or biological and/or, at the time, nuclear efforts. And the president then went ahead with shock and awe, and right after that, and from the very moment he did that, right after that, I opposed what he was doing and spoke to it. When we came into office, the first thing that the President of the United States asked me to do when this national security team came into the Oval Office in February and said, here's how we're going to move forward, he turned, and it's a matter of record now, and said, no, Joe will handle Iraq. He knows more about it than anybody. Work with Joe. And they asked me to get 156,000 troops out of Iraq, ground troops, including my son, and we got them out of Iraq. With regard to the issue of whether or not I advised the president not to go after Saddam Hussein, one of the things that a president has to be sure of is that the Vice President of the United States, his closest ally, will never put him in a position where he is embarrassed in front of even his national security team. It got down to the issue that because of literally the phases of the moon as to whether or not we were going to be able to go in at a time certain to go after where we thought, and the red team wasn't at all sure that bin Laden was where we thought he was. We weren't sure of it. And what happened was, the question was whether or not we should go. And he went around the room, and only 2 people in the room said absolutely yes, go. Others said maybe yes, maybe no. To preserve the president's authority, I said to the president, I said, there's one thing, I said, I would vote for you to do another pass to determine whether he's there. And then as we walked out of the room, and it's now public knowledge, I went up to the Oval Office and said, Mr. President, follow your instincts, go. But if I said that to a president in front of everyone else, and he didn't go, then in fact, it would have been news. It would have been, or conversely, if he did go and I was on the other side. So I never gave a president my final opinion in front of anybody except him alone in the Oval Office. And it took a great deal of courage for him to do what he did because he risked his entire presidency doing it. And by the way, one of the most moving moments of my career was when the president announced, when we sat there and we watched what was happening simultaneously, and a lot of you have come up to me to ask me to sign those pictures, that there's a lot of pictures of us sitting there around that security table down in the Situation Room. And when we came home and the president was able to confirm for certain that it was bin Laden that we had gotten, I drove back to the vice president's residence, and it was a bit of a balmy night, and my wife was sitting on the steps of the vice presidential mansion, and we were in her bathrobe, and as I came up the driveway, there were 1,000 people outside the gate singing, "God Bless America, God Bless America." You may remember, I'm the guy after 9/11 said, we will follow bin Laden to the gates of hell if we have to get him. I was widely criticized for saying that, but we had to make sure that we got him, to make sure that everybody knows nothing will go unanswered from us when that kind of treachery occurs. So it's not to suggest I haven't made mistakes in my career, but I will put my record against anyone in public life in terms of foreign policy. And but it's But, by the way, it's a totally legitimate question. I'm not criticizing the question. It's a totally legitimate question. Totally legitimate question. Over this end.
Hi. Just like Joe Biden, the next First Lady of the United States, my mom is an educator who got one of her degrees from the University of Delaware. And my question is, when you're president, what will you do to solve the inequalities in our public school systems?
Listen, man. What's your name? Nick, how old are you? Nick, 14. When you're president and they say Biden's out in the waiting room, promise me you won't say Joe who, okay? Oh, my Lord. All right. First of all, there is inequity in our system. And the first thing I will do as the President of the United States, and by the way, I am Joe Biden's husband. That's how I'm known around the country and here in Iowa as well. And the first thing we'll do to deal with the inequity in education is Betsy DeVos will be looking for a different job. No, for real. And secondly, I made an absolute commitment that in fact, Betsy DeVos will be replaced with someone who is actually taught in a classroom. Actually taught in a classroom. And the reason you can be assured I'll keep that commitment, if I don't keep it, I'll be sleeping in the Lincoln bedroom by myself. I'll be in real trouble. But very practical thing. Look, number one, there has been considerable inequity in our schools, particularly relates to brown and black populations, and particularly in poor districts. We have what they call Title I schools. You have them, I sound like a wonk here, but it's those schools which have very low tax bases and don't have enough money to invest as much money in their school system as other schools do. And they aren't necessarily brown and black. They could be rural white schools, etc. But here's what we do. if we triple the amount of money we spend on Title I schools, right now we spend $15 billion a year on Title I schools. And that is to try to help equalize the tax base and give them a little more authority, a little more opportunity. I would take that, and I've proposed this for a long time, and we'll get it done, to $45 billion a year, triple that. That allows three things to happen immediately. Number one, every school teacher can begin to earn what they deserve, and they can move towards $60,000 a year, for real. If your mom graduated from the University of Delaware with a teaching degree, an education degree, she started off a job on average 23% less than someone graduating with any other degree other than social work. These are not somebody else's children, they're all our children. They're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions aloft. And school teachers, we're short now 150,000 school teachers because of pay and pay inequity. And secondly, we're expected over the next decade to get to as many as 500,000 teachers short. That's going to be a devastating impact on public education and education generally, because we're going to significantly increase class size. Learning ability is going to drop. So, number one, make teachers' pay competitive. Number two, will allow everybody 3, 4, and 5 years old to go to school, not daycare, school. And all your great universities here, from Drake to the University of Iowa to all the schools, all the major schools in the country pointed out, we've learned a lot. If you do that, you increase by an average of 48% the likelihood of a child from modest means being able to graduate from high school and go beyond high school. There's concrete evidence, because they make up rapidly the disadvantage they have by not having books in the household, by not having heard as many words spoken, I could go on. Third thing it does is right now we have a paucity of school psychologists. We, in fact, now have, there's 2 studies. One says 1 school psychologist for every 1,400 kids. Another says 1 for every 1,507 kids. The ratio should be between 1 to 500 and 1 to 700. So we're going to hire a lot more school psychologists, because we've learned another thing. Drug problems in America don't cause mental illness. Mental illness is the reason why we have additional drug problems. And you can identify early on children who need help. Doesn't mean you put them in institutions, but you guide them, and you guide their parents and give them help to be able to get through difficult times. We also put more social workers in schools, because they don't exist now. They don't exist by and large. They used to. There's so many things we can do at the early. If I only had $1 to spend, you said I could spend it on preschool or post-high school, I would spend it on preschool. But we don't have to just limit it to that. We have to make sure that not everybody can, the only way to live a middle-class life in the 21st century is not with a college education, but with skills. And so we should be providing for the ability of everyone to go to get a trade and or a certificate to find new jobs and or go to community college for free. And by the way, that costs a lot of money, $6 billion. $6 billion to put every single person qualified for community college in school or get a degree that requires a certificate to become to learn a trade or anything else. And by the way, the other thing that's happening, we're in the middle of what we call the 4th industrial revolution. Will there be middle-class jobs because of all the changes taking place in technology? Look what's happened. There were roughly 220,000 sales jobs in retail outlets around America about 18 months ago. Average salary, $50,000 a year, average age, 49 years of age, and mostly high school educated. Well, guess what? You all aren't going to those malls anymore. You're not going to Benetton's at the mall. You're not going to the outlet for Saks. You're going on Amazon. And I'm not saying they're bad, but guess what happens? So now all those folks lost their jobs. So what do you do when you're a high school educated 50-year-old making $50,000 a year and you're half or all of the family's income? Well, you have to go back and get retrained. Every one of those people should be able to go back and get a degree that allows them to find a new trade or a new occupation in by going to community college for free. For example, there's 100,000 jobs out there in high tech that in fact don't require a four-year degree, but require you to go back to school to learn another trade. For example, we don't even treat programming in school as one of the sciences that qualifies for, but guess what? I'll give you one example, Detroit. The president gave me all the easy jobs. Get Detroit back on its feet. No, I'm serious. You all remember, he used to say at the State of the Union, and Joe Biden's going to do it, Sheriff Joe kind of thing. And he'd never tell me he was going to have me do it. He thought it was great fun to give me that assignment. But the good news was when he gave me those responsibilities, he gave me authority. Well, guess what? Detroit was on its knees. It got off its knees out of bankruptcy because the president gave me the authority to use anyone in administration and gather all the resources available. Everything from street lighting to rail in the city to a whole range of things. But guess what? It got out of bankruptcy. It was starting to move. We found out one thing. Everybody, they didn't know how to turn on the street lights anymore. There wasn't anybody who knew how to run the sewer system, to turn it on. There wasn't anybody, literally, because it's all programmed. And everybody, black, white, and Asian, had moved out who had that ability. So we went out and hired an international outfit to go and train people who train high-tech people. They went out and got 54 women. Coincidentally, it wasn't intended. They're all women from tough neighborhoods. 2/3 of them had only high school degrees. About 1/3 of them only had a GED. After a 19-week program at the community college, which we put together, our program put together, every one of them had a job. The lowest paying job, $48,000. The highest paying job, $102,000. They learned how to program. And what I found is even my liberal friends in the Congress said you can't expect people to learn that. Look, anybody who learns how to throw coal into a blast furnace or knows how to run a machine is going to maybe learn how to run a photovoltaic machine making solar panels on the floor. It takes 19 weeks to learn it. And we need, there's 100,000 good-paying jobs out there that are going unfilled because people do not have the training. And so we can put these people back to work. The point I'm making is that there's a lot we can do. We also have to reduce student debt. Right now, what we have is, with free community college, you cut 4 years, you cut the cost of a four-year degree in half. Because and all the community college courses are transferable to a four-year university in every one of our states. It may not be the way, what I do for people who, in fact, are under the income of $50,000, I double Pell Grants, meaning because a lot of people can get into community college for free, they still can't go because they can't afford a room, they can't afford the food, they can't afford the books. And so the Pell Grants we double from $6,000 to $12,000 a year, allowing them the ability to be able to get to school and move forward for people who are low income. In addition to that, we reduce from 10% of your disposable income to 5%. You have to pay back your loan. That means after you have paid your rent, made sure your car payments, your food, everything, you pay only 5% of that income back for your student loan, and you are until 10 years and it gets paid off. Thirdly, if in fact you decide you want to go into public service, and that includes teaching, if you decide to go into public service or the Peace Corps or work in a violence women's shelter or whatever you do, that for 5 years, if you do it for 5 years, you get $10,000 a year knocked off your student debt, so that in fact you can get to zero.
Mr. Vice President, behind you here, I've got a question.
Okay.
A very important question. And actually, I got to be honest with you, it's not for you.
Uh-oh.
I've got a question for every single person in this room. Who's ready to commit to caucus for Vice President Joe Biden? We need you more than ever right now. We are so excited. I got to tell you, it has been an honor to get to be with you these last couple of days and to see your leadership over the years. We need him in the White House, but to do that, it all starts right here in Iowa. You guys know this. You've got to knock on doors. You've got to commit to caucus, but you've got to do so much more. You've got to bring your friends. You've got to get out there. Volunteer to be precinct captains. You've got to do everything you can. Please, 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 we've got to do this. The future of our state and our country depends on it. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Can I say something? Folks, I'll stick around. I don't want to keep you because I realize I've kept you late. I apologize. It's 9:35, but I tell you what, you're nice. I will stay here, and I want to say hello to every one of you if I can, and take a selfie and ask your questions, answer your questions, and I might ask you a few as well. Thank you for looking me over.